If you're a facilities manager at a warehouse and your HVAC system goes down, it can turn up the heat, literally. But don't sweat it, Grainger has you covered. Grainger offers over 1 million industrial-grade products for all your operations, including warehouse HVAC maintenance. And even better, they offer access to experts and fast delivery, so you and your warehouse can both keep your cool. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
The NFL Draft is now officially open.
This is draft season. John Schmeelk and Tony Pauline. It's brought to you by Moody's. Moody's is a proud partner of the New York Giants. Decode risk, unlock opportunity. Learn more at Moody's.com. Tony, college football week number 2. Busy show today. We'll review week 2. We also have Jim Nagy, who is the executive director of the Senior Bowl, will come your way in the back half of this podcast. Good conversation about their watch list and what this draft class looks in general. But a fun weekend of college football, and there was a big post-game locker room with the Chargers after they won week 1 against the Raiders, with the whole team chanting, "The worm is turned." Well, the worm might not only have turned for Jim Harbaugh's new team, it might have turned a little bit for Jim Harbaugh's old team as well, in a very, very one-sided loss to the Texas Longhorns.
And you had to expect it. I mean, people talk about J.J. McCarthy moving on, Roman Wilson and the receivers moving on, the running backs moving on, one of the top running back, Quentin Corum moving on. But the fact is, the Michigan Wolverines lost 7 offensive linemen from last year's team. 7 offensive linemen who were either drafted or playing in camp. So you had to expect that there was going to be some sort of a drop-off.
Yeah, no question about it. So let's start with the quarterback for Texas, Quinn Ewers. What were your thoughts?
I thought he was efficient, not great, protected the football, moved the team down the field. The thing that concerns me about Quentin Ewers, and we mentioned this last year, is at times he's a little bit late pulling the trigger. He seems a little bit slow in his decision-making at times, does have a tendency to stare down the primary target. When I reached out to Texas people about it, they say, well, he just doesn't want to make a mistake. Well, that's nice, but you can't do that in the NFL. You got to make your mind up. You got to pull the trigger. But again, he's winning, he's moving the team, and he's doing it efficiently. Now, I think one of the reasons that he was able to do that was because of the offensive line of Texas, which is terrific. And their left tackle, Kelvin Banks, I tweeted about him during the game. He was just phenomenal. I mean, really established himself, or looked like the top 20 pick that people think he's going to be. I think he's going to go even earlier. He's big. He's mobile. He's strong. He was terrific in pass protection. There were a couple of plays where they slid him inside from the tackle spot where he took on and dominated Kenneth Grant, the big athletic defensive tackle from Michigan, and took him out of the game on running downs. He shows the ability to get out to the second level. There were so many things to like about Kelvin Banks. Granted, now they're in the SEC, so he's going to get tested more and more as the season goes on. But he really stood out to me in that win over Michigan.
Yeah, there could be another couple top 10 tackles in this year's draft. Banks is one of them. You have the 2 LSU players as well, so something to keep an eye on. What are the players in the Texas-Michigan game, Tony, jumped out to you?
I mean, Michigan had some good players on defense, even though they let up 31 points. I thought Derek Moore, the linebacker, played incredibly well. McCary Page, the safety, had a lot of nice plays. And Jashwan Barham, the transfer from Maryland, who was basically a pass rusher at Maryland. They're using him now more as a traditional linebacker at Michigan, although they do blitz him on occasion. He's only a junior, showed a lot of good things. So I think with Michigan, as we've talked about, you're going to see their top prospects, unlike last year when they were on offense with J.J. McCarthy, they're going to come from the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, no question about it. And for Texas, it was their tight end leading the way, Tony. 7 catches for 98 yards and a touchdown. Yours, you mentioned 246 yards, 3 touchdown passes. Penn State, we're seeing, Tony, the Nittany Lions are more of a passing attack here, and 2 tight ends stood out for you in that game.
And I think the Nittany Lions are getting a little bit more than they bargained for. That West Virginia game was kind of close in the beginning, and really the game against Bowling Green was close through the third quarter. Now, the Nittany Lions tight end, Tyler Warren, had a terrific game, 8 receptions for 146 yards. But it was the Bowling Green tight end, Harold Fannin Jr., who is a junior, who really stood out. 11 receptions, 137 yards, 1 TD. If you watch that game late in the game, Penn State was basically moving their coverage towards Fannin to protect against the fact that they couldn't stop him, and he was still catching the ball. Now, Fannin's a junior. He's already been graded by scouts. He's graded as a day 3 pick. So when you get a tight end out of the MAC who's a junior already being graded by scouts, it tells you he's got some next level talent. I think this is going to be his last year at Bowling Green. He's either going to enter the draft or he will probably play for a major school next year, possibly for a Big Ten team. But Harold Fannin Jr. was a guy that, in the scouting community, people knew about him before the season began, really has taken his game to another level and really stood out against Penn State, which is going to be the toughest opponent that Bowling Green plays this year.
Yeah, Tony, you took the words out of my mouth. When you play for a program like Bowling Green and you have that one big Power 5 team or whatever it is now, Power 4, I don't know how you want to term it, whatever. What are the Power Conference teams on your schedule? Those are the games where you have to kind of take advantage because those are the games that the scout's going to be watching it, and they're going to put a little bit more into that game because you're playing against a tougher opponent.
And he absolutely did. And like I said, late in the third quarter, when Bowling Green was still in that game, you could see how Penn State was basically gearing and shifting the coverage towards Fannin to double team him, to make sure there was a safety on him as well as a linebacker, whoever else they had covering him off the line of scrimmage.
All right, let's move on to that Oklahoma State-Arkansas game, Tony. Arkansas came up on the wrong end of that, but you liked one of their wide receivers and you liked the linebacker from Oklahoma State.
It was a great football game, except if you were an Arkansas fan. I mean, they had that game. Winning that game, it looked like it was going to be a cakewalk. Oklahoma State comes back. They win it in overtime. Nick Martin, who was basically second linebacker on that Oklahoma State team. Colin Oliver is the guy that scouts like. He's a senior. He's an explosive guy. He went down early in the game with a leg injury. Then Nick Martin basically just blew it all up. 16 tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, 3 quarterback hurries. He's an explosive guy. I actually, even though scouts love Colin Oliver, off the 2023 film, I actually have Martin rated slightly higher because he's faster, he's quicker, he's probably a little bit smaller, but he's more explosive. And Andrew Armstrong, the receiver from Arkansas, 10 receptions, 164 yards, entered the season graded as a PFA. He was responsible for 70% of the receiving yards from Arkansas. He's a long guy. He's sure-handed. He's not fast. He's your prototypical possession receiver, but he just does so many things well. I have him as a late-round pick. If you're looking for a receiver, a possession receiver, sure-handed, reliable guy in the late round, 6th, 7th round, I think teams will look towards Andrew Armstrong. A lot will depend on how he tests before the draft next April.
Yeah, and you wouldn't expect him to be a sub 4.5 guy. So it's a matter if he's in the low 4.5s, as he gets into the 4.6s, that could be a big problem. So we'll have to see how he tests in that 40-yard dash. All right, let's go to Notre Dame. Wasn't a good weekend for Notre Dame fans either. No. Riley Leonard in that game, their quarterback, 20 of 32, only 163 yards and 2 picks. And even after that week 1 win, we talked a little bit about how he looked good as a runner, but struggled as a passer, and that continued here in week 2.
That's been Riley Leonard for 3 years. I mean, going back to his days at Duke, he was an athletic guy with a big arm who would occasionally make nice passes, but he wasn't a good, a quarterback that was consistently beat opponents with his arm, with his passing ability. I said it last week, talked about it last week, in that week 1 win over Texas A&M. Notre Dame primarily won because of the big runs, because they were able to get long runs late in the game. And Riley Leonard was sort of like on the side helping out. He was not good against Northern Illinois, who really they should have pounded. Credit to that Northern Illinois team. This is the kind of game that gets coaches from Notre Dame fired. You lose to Northern Illinois the way you did at home. And I think for Riley Leonard, it is just an extension of what I've seen the past 3 years. A good athlete trying to play quarterback who's shown minimal progress as a passer.
All right, now we got a few players, some other teams and games. Tony, North Carolina State, you like what you saw out of Anthony Belton this week?
Yeah, I mean, North Carolina State got pounded by Tennessee, 51-10 or something. That was primarily due to Grayson McCall, the former Coastal Carolina quarterback who's never really progressed. He's a nice college quarterback. But I was impressed, and I tweeted this out before the game, and I put up my preview from Sportskeeda about North Carolina State. Anthony Belton is a guy that is all over the place in the scouting community. Last year, some scouts had him graded as a second round pick. He didn't play that well. He went back to school. Now some scouts have him graded as a late round pick. He's one of those guys that at times, as I said all along, looks like Tarzan, plays like Jane. He's large, he's insanely athletic, and he can be dominant. And if you watch the Tennessee game, he was pretty darn good. I mean, James Pierce, who a lot of people think is going to be a top 5 pick, had 1 tackle, half a tackle for loss, didn't have a sack. And he basically, he basically kept the Tennessee pass rushers at bay. He's got to improve his balance. He's got to be more consistent. I mean, here's a guy, he's going to be about 6'5", 340 plus pounds at the combine. He's going to run the 4.9. He's going to look very good moving around. It's just a matter of him consistently playing at a high level. And I thought he showed a lot of good things. He's your developmental type guy. He's got all the tools. He's just got to put it together.
How about the South Carolina-Kentucky game, Tony? What you see in that game that you liked?
Yeah, I mean, Nick Emawari, the guy that we spoke about with Bruce Feldman, the big linebacker size safety from South Carolina who beat Kentucky pretty badly. 7 tackles, 1 interceptions. He looks like a linebacker in the defensive secondary, but he goes sideline to sideline. He's got terrific ball skills. TJ Sanders, the defensive lineman, keep an eye on him. He can take over games. 4 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, 1 sack. He's a junior. He's already getting mid-round grades. You go back and you watch the Georgia film from 2023, they could not stop Sanders. He took over the game. He has that sort of potential. He showed a bit of it against Kentucky. If his game takes off, TJ Sanders, he is definitely a guy who could be a top 45 selection next April.
All right, now let's go out to the rivalry out there in corn country, Iowa State, Tony. Tough loss for Iowa, 20-19 in that game, 1 point defeat, but there were a couple players that jumped out to you.
Tough loss. They were winning the game all throughout. And again, like Arkansas, you thought it was going to be a cakewalk. Iowa State, a well-coached team, came back and won the game late. Jennings Dunker, the right tackle for Iowa, keep an eye on him. I think he's going to be the next big-time offensive lineman to come out of that program. Not a great fleet-footed pass blocker, but he's a dominant, powerful, strong run blocker. I mentioned Nick Emawari, this big safety from South Carolina. Well, Mark Verdon of Iowa State is that type of guy. He's big. He looks like a linebacker. 13 tackles, 1 pass broken up in that game. And you know that Iowa likes to run the game, 13 tackles. He is just a big enforcer who I think is a middle-round pick. He's only a junior if he enters the draft. The thing about Iowa is they have a lot of premier talent that are true sophomores. Guys to keep an eye on really for the 2026 draft, not to get ahead of ourselves.
Your Zoom glitched a little bit, Tony. Malik Verdon or Mark Verdon?
Malik Verdon.
Got it. Perfect.
I believe it's Malik.
Yes. Anything else from this weekend that jumped out at you that you want to hit on before we get to Mr. Nagy?
No, I guess you got to talk about the Nebraska-Colorado game because things have the worm has definitely turned in Colorado, and we're seeing a continuation of the bad play last year, and a lot of the talk is going to be around Shedeur Sanders. I mean, the quarterback. I look at him, and I think he's just trying to do too much. The offensive line is terrible. I mean, Deion Sanders
last year, and it's bad again. It's bad for a second
year. And what happened was Deion Sanders came in 2023, told everybody to leave. He brought in his own guys. And then a lot of people just didn't like, a lot of players didn't like Deion Sanders, and they all left. And Sanders is basically playing with a brand new offensive line. All the good offensive linemen from 2023 left. Savion Washington, a massive guy. He's playing for Syracuse right now. And I look at Shedeur Sanders, and I'm reminded of Jordan Love and Josh Allen in their junior years before they entered the draft, in the sense that they didn't have, they were getting pounded and they were just trying to do too much. I think I see a lot of that with Sanders. He's just trying to do too much, trying to make too much happen. And, he's getting the snot beat out of him because they can't block for him.
Yeah, we knew Matt Rule, by the way. He struggled in Carolina as an NFL coach, but it seems like he's starting to turn around that Nebraska program.
He struggled the first half of the year against Nebraska. Colorado pounded Nebraska last year, if you remember, in the opening part of the year. And then all of a sudden, late in the middle part of last year, Rule started to turn it around. They're going to be players. They're going to be a tough team to beat in the Big Ten. I'm actually going to the Nebraska-Ohio State game the end of October. And I think Ohio State, they better be careful because Nebraska is going to come in and they're going to be ready to play. They don't have great players, Nebraska, but they have a lot of real good players on defense. You got Raiola, the quarterback. They've got good players who, like when Jim Harbaugh was at Michigan, they seem to play good team football. They're playing within the system. And I know they've got some draft prospects that we'll be talking about in the coming weeks.
Yeah, fans are going to hear about Raiola a lot over the next few months, Tony, as Nebraska starts to play more of these national games. Just so fans know, he is not draft eligible, true freshman, so it's going to be a couple years for him. But it is someone certainly that we'll be tracking here, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's supposed to be a really, really good player, something we will certainly keep an eye on. All right, before we get to Jim Nagy here, I want to remind everybody that draft season is presented by Moody's. Moody's is a proud partner of the New York Giants, uniting the brightest minds to turn today's risks into tomorrow's opportunities. Learn more at Moody's.com. Jim Nagy, friend of the program, executive director of the Reese's Senior Bowl. Tony and I had a chance to talk to him a couple of weeks ago before the season started about the draft class and what to keep an eye on through the college football season this year.
And now we're joined by our guest, the executive director of the Senior Bowl. He's about to get in his car and start scouting some college players. He is Jim Nagy. Jim, it's good to see you, man. How are you?
I'm great, John. Good to be on with you and Tony, man. This is it's here. It's here. It's here. So let's go.
Yeah, and look, this is a very different year of college football, and you can take this any way you want, whether it's the playoff, new coaches at big-time programs. I just feel like so much is different this year in college football 2024. How is that impacting you in the way you're looking at these teams and players getting ready for the draft and Senior Bowl next year?
Well, I agree with you. Yeah, it feels like there's more uncertainty. The cool part is this new playoff format's going to keep a lot more college fan bases engaged, right? I mean, if you're one of these, fan bases that thinks your team, it's like playoff or bust, and that you lose a couple games early on in normal years, you're out of it. And you just you don't have any more hope. But there'll be a lot more hope this year in college football, which I think it'll be awesome. I can't wait to get to that playoff format. That'll be fun. Seeing some on-campus playoff games. I mean, that's really cool. But yeah, in terms of like evaluating for the Senior Bowl, I mean, all we can do is do what we've done. I mean, you're evaluating the players, and the good thing is some of these guys in new schemes being used differently. So that'll help clean up the evaluation in some cases. So yeah, I mean, we do a lot of work in the off season. I know we're going to talk about the watch list a little bit, but I tell all our guys, and we promise these players, like we got to go into the season with a kind of a clean slate. This year's tape is the most important, and not that we won't factor in what we've seen in previous years, but we want all these guys to play well this year.
I want to ask you more of a college football question, because, you are at the eye of the hurricane there in the state of Alabama. You talk about changes. I mean, you look at the college football situation in Alabama, you got an up-and-coming Troy program. You got Jacksonville State, who made their entrance, loud and clear last year. You expect to have an improved Auburn plan. And then you have the king of the throne, Alabama, who underwent some, monumental changes in the offseason with Nick Saban retiring, and, you don't know what's going to happen there. There were some transfers. What is the feeling in your state moving towards, as we move into the 2024 season?
I mean, gosh, it's kind of the central theme, John. Tony, is that there's just so much movement we don't know. I just got done. That's why I've got a dress shirt on. I just was speaking at something here in Mobile to a big room of Tide fans. And I mean, I think Alabama's going to be good. I think Kalen DeBoer's a great coach. I think it's, I'll be excited for like years 2 and 3. But there's more unknowns in Tuscaloosa than ever. Troy, John Summerall just left Troy and went to Tulane. So that's a new thing. Kane Womack went up to Tuscaloosa, left South Alabama. Now we got Major Applewhite down here. You got Trent Dilfer going into year 2 or year 3 at UAB. I mean, there's and then Hugh Freeze. I mean, I think that there's been a real uptick in recruiting at Auburn this summer that I know they're really excited about in the building. They're fired up about, what these next couple of classes look like they're lining up to be. So, but yeah, I mean, well, the one known quantity every year has been like what's going to happen in Tuscaloosa. We know under Coach Saban they're gonna be there at the end for a college football playoff spot. And I don't think we can say that this year. And that's no knock on Kalen DeBoer. I think he's going to do a great job there. I think he's a hell of a coach. But they did. I mean, you lose Caleb Downs and you lose, some of the other pieces. I mean, they lost some stuff this offseason. So just a lot of unknowns is the best way to say it.
You mentioned the Senior Bowl watch list came out. You can go to seniorbowl.watchlist if folks want to go check that out. What's different about the watch list this year? What makes it stand out compared to other watch lists you've put out, Jim? I know the anticipation was that this was going to be a ginormous, for lack of a better term, draft class. Was that reflected in your watch list?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that thing was way bigger than I want it to be, and hopefully it won't be that big in future years. Again, I've said this on a couple things, coming out of the immediacy of the now we're a couple weeks removed from it. In the immediacy of the draft, the watch list release. One thing we've never tried to do here at the Senior Bowl since I got here, 7 years ago, I never want to pump false hope into any of these kids, right? I don't want them to think that. I don't want to just put them on a list for like social media engagement. I've been on enough phone calls right after the draft with players that think they're going to get drafted that, I'm calling them, working on the team side, to, make them an undrafted free agent. And they're going to play in the NFL, right? Like that should be a really cool moment. That should be special. They should be excited about it, but they're not, because somewhere along the line, somebody has told them they're going to be an NFL draft pick, which all these guys want to be picks. I get that part. But so we never try to do that. We really try to limit it. But for a couple of reasons, it's bigger. The juniors are on it this year. There's 81 juniors. We've never had that in the past. The NFL didn't announce that ruling until the early part of last November, so they weren't on last year's list. And even paring that list down, right? Like we could have went crazy and thrown 200 juniors on the list, but I wanted to be realistic with that. There was 59 juniors come out last year. So why would we throw 200 names on the list? So we were at 81. And also I don't want to throw a bunch of juniors on there that I'm going to be getting calls from college coaches being like, what are you trying to do, man? Like we want this guy back in school. Like, why are you promoting this guy as a draft eligible guy? So again, we've worked hard at those relationships over the years. So that's that. So there's that. There's the junior part of it. We added specialists this year. We gave the kickers, snappers, and punters a little love. And then really the biggest reason why it's so beefed up is that this is the last year of that extra COVID year. So there's a lot of 5th and 6th year seniors as opposed to in years past. So yeah, we're sitting at 859. I would love that number to be closer to 500. But it was what it was. That's where the grades ended up. We had like, if you ended up on the list, you had kind of a grade that would get you in an NFL training camp next year. So it's kind of how it shook out.
Jim, I want to ask you a question about the process with the juniors. And, it's funny, just go through a timeline. I'll probably make you laugh, but a lot of people don't know what the heck I'm talking about. 30 years ago, there was an eccentric guy by the name of Dave T. Thomas who used to run the Hula Bowl when it was actually played in Aloha Stadium. And he invited juniors to his game, and the NFL said, no way, wouldn't let any team representatives go and scout. I'm sure a lot of scouts that were upset because they missed out on a free trip to Hawaii. And then the Senior Bowl under Phil Savage was actually the first that allowed juniors to play in the game, juniors who were on pace to get their degree in a timely manner or before the time comes. And then, as you said, the league makes the announcement last year, juniors can play in the game. If you have, let's say, 2 offensive tackles or 2 receivers, one's a senior, one's an underclassman, and they're both neck and neck as far as your gradings are concerned, do you think there's going to be some sort of deference to the senior player, or how is that process going to work out? Because this still is the Senior Bowl. Right.
No, that's great context there. Great historical context there. Yeah, Phil's. Again, Phil was in this chair when the league made that ruling, and it was, you had to have your diploma in hand by December. It wasn't like an on track thing. You had to have it. You had to be graduated. And that was one of the things when we got here, we realized like we need to take advantage of that. So we've had as many as 16 juniors in the game, even when it was just the graduate thing. Now, when I look at this year's game, this past year we had 10 first rounders. All of them were seniors. We didn't get a single junior last year, and I think it was because of the timeline of when it was released. I just don't think a lot of these kids like get it in their head what their pre-draft process is going to look like, and for those juniors, I don't think they factored in Senior Bowl at all. So that's where I think we can get better this year. People always ask, what's next and what do you want to do? Well, and I think we've got a lot of room to improve. because there was a lot of junior receivers that we couldn't convince to come down here to Mobile. I mean, a lot of those guys that ended up not coming got jumped by the guys that came to Mobile. I mean, the Ricky Pearsalls, the Ladd McConkeys, the Xavier Leggett's. All you got to do is go back to pre-Senior Bowl mock first-round drafts, and there was a lot of juniors up there above those three guys for sure. So no, it's something where, again, it's, I understand the question. I would say we're always trying to bring the guys down here that the league wants to see most, and just historically, conventional thinking has always been we need to see the juniors because we don't know them as well. The league, when I say we mean the league, the scouts. They don't feel like they know those guys as much as players, because even though this thing has shifted quite a bit over the years in terms of schools being more open to talking about juniors. I mean, Tony, you know this. It used to be taboo as a scout. Like if you show up at a school and you ask about a junior, like I've been in those rooms where a young scout would ask about a junior, and not only would the coach get pissed off, the rest of the scouts, like as soon as the coach walked out, like the guy got a code red from the other scouts in the room for even asking about a junior. So, but there are students I'm getting long-winded, but schools are being more open about the juniors, but there's still some that aren't. There's still some schools that don't want to talk about this guy. So all things being equal, same grade, feel the same way about the player, I would probably defer to the junior player because, again, I feel like we work for the 32 teams. And if we're doing that, we're trying to bring the guys they need to get to know better. Same thing goes with like guys with character issues, Tony. So like there's a couple of non-negotiables like domestic stuff, weapons stuff. Like we'll stay away from those players if we have that information. But if it's close, like if the teams are worried about how much a guy loves football or some football character thing, or, even if like, we want all our guys to get drafted. So it doesn't always behoove us to bring some of those guys. But if the league feels like, Jim, we would love to spend a week with this kid and figure this guy out, even if I know it might work against us in April and a guy not get picked, we're going to bring the guy because we serve the teams. I want to bring the guys they want to be around. So.
And Tony, real quick, Tony, I want to
say is,
go ahead, Tony, real quick. I just want to follow up on that answer real fast. How does that communication happen with the teams in terms of knowing which guys that they want to know more about? You talk to scouts, you talk to GMs, Jim. How do those conversations take place?
Yeah, John. So when Phil Savage had this job, I was living in Mobile. Phil's a good friend of mine. I mean, Phil's great. He did a great job at this game. But I would get like a one-off phone call here and then. Hey, Jim, what do you think about this guy? What do you think about this guy? And I'm sure he was doing that with a lot of people. Right. All we've done here since I got here is, we have our Zoom meetings with our scouting staff at the end of October. I feel like 8 or 9 weeks of the college season, you've got a pretty good handle on how it's going to shake out. Now, we still watch November. We still go out in November. We hold some roster spots back. So the guys that play well in November, because college coaches want us to do that. They don't want to feel like this whole thing's locked up in the early November and those kids have nothing to play for. But once we get the board feeling good about it, when I feel good about how things are, then we start our formal call process. So like with the Giants, I'll call Joe Shane, and he'll get a couple of his lieutenants on the phone. And I try to do this with at least half the league. So every year it's like 14, 15, 16 teams, 17 teams. And we just go position by position. And so like for last year's game at the quarterback spot, I'll be like, okay, we want Jaden Daniels. We want Bo Nix. We want Michael Penix. We want Spencer Rattler. Are you good with those guys? And 99% of the time they're like, yep, that's exactly how we have it. Okay. And I'm like, okay, so for those next couple spots, we've got Michael Pratt. We like Michael Pratt. And we have those conversations across the board. And again, because of the relationships of being in the league for so long, I mean, shoot, Joe and I got in the league at the same time. And it varies from team to team a little bit. I mean, there's some teams that'll be like, Jim, we've got 2 third-round picks and a 5 and a 6 on that guy. Like they'll be as that specific. They will say what rounds, if they've got 4 grades, they'll tell me all 4 grades. So then we have an idea of the span. Other teams will be like, they'll ballpark it more. They'll be like, yeah, we've got midday 3 stuff on him, Jim, or we've got across the board day 2 grades. So that's, again, that helps us put the roster together, bring the guys they want to see. So that's usually done right around Halloween time.
Yeah, more of a comment than a question. You talked about getting to know players, and I think I've been going to the Senior Bowl since 2000. Practices were always important. You mentioned Phil Savage. I think what he really did with the interview process at the Senior Bowl really took that whole week to a next level because it takes so much of the workload off from a lot of these guys from the combine. They don't have to go and interview these players again because they interviewed them so intensely at the Senior Bowl. And, as you know, there'll be guys who come into Mobile who are not on the roster, who are not playing, who just want to interview with the teams that are there. And I think that is something major that Phil developed and you have built upon in Mobile.
Yeah, well, a couple things there, Tony. Yeah, Phil did a great job in a lot of areas. We've had to change up the interview process a little bit since COVID. It used to be an absolute free-for-all on the second floor of the team hotel. I mean, and I was probably more sensitive to it once I got here, but you couldn't get from the elevators on the second floor of the hotel to just have breakfast in the morning without some guy like me jumping on your back asking you, when I'm talking about players now, asking a player for, to sit down for 10 minutes. So by the time they, even get to breakfast, they're late for meetings. And it was just a crap show. I mean, it was agents, it was scouts, it was, financial planners, it was media people. So what the COVID year forced us to do, right? We stripped away everything from the week. We just had practices. We just had the game, and we had to formalize all the interviews. We spent whatever that number was, $8,000 or $11,000, whatever it was, on plexiglass. And we had to formalize all the interviews. So now the teams know when they're meeting with each guy. We let them, we do a process where they can, they can request additional interview time with another handful of players. We've pulled the quarterbacks out of the interview process, and they do their own separate thing now, so they get even more time. But I just did this. I just was talking to a GM the other day, and he's like, Jim, if we leave Mobile and the guy was good enough in the interview process there, we don't even worry about him the rest of the time. We won't even talk to him at the combine. And when we do our survey, we survey our players after the game. And you would imagine, like most surveys, the response rate is hit or miss. But we usually get about 30% of the guys will respond to the survey. And that's what they said. One of the best takeaways is that they went to Indy, and the combine experience was so much easier than the guys that weren't here. If they had a roommate at the combine who didn't play here, in comparison, how much easier their week was. So there is value in it. The interview process is paramount. Now, we don't bring players down here just to do interviews. That's going to be the end of the All-Star process. If that continues to happen, and it's happened at other games, I have spoken to the league office numerous times this offseason. If we're just inviting players to do interviews, in a couple of years, we're not going to have any of these guys on the field competing. Agents are going to abuse the heck out of that. I mean, there was players that I know were healthy enough to participate in All-Star games last year, and I told the agents, no, they can't come here to do it, because we did it with Hendon Hooker a couple of years ago because it was kind of a one-off. I mean, I thought Hendon deserved it, but it shouldn't have been a widespread practice. And now that it's becoming one, we got to be really careful. The league office knows, they're on alert. The GMs aren't happy about it. The players that are in All-Star games should be here on the field competing, not just using it for an interview process. They can do that. They can do that at the combine. They can do it at their pro day. They can do it on a 30 visit. What they can't do is get it in pads and compete.
Absolutely. One other process question before we start dipping into some of the players here, Jim. When do you start talking to the actual players about guys that, all right, we're going to send you an invite? Or do you not say anything to the guys until the official one comes, like in December? How does that process work, communicating with the colleges and the players about when you start telling those guys, we definitely want you in this game for the Senior Bowl?
Yeah, John, that's a great question. We leave these players alone, man. I don't reach out to these players at all. I'll see them over the summer at Manning Camp or something like that, or SEC Media Days, or if I'm out on the field pregame at a game on Saturday and a position coach or coordinator brings a guy over, that's always awesome to get to meet him. But I respect the college coaches way too much to be jumping in these kids' DMs and bothering. They should be focused on winning football games for whatever school they're at, not what All-Star game, if they're going to play in an All-Star game or not. So, no, we don't hit them up. We don't talk to them. I'll have conversations with agents, and that's changed a little bit. I mean, now because of NIL, all these guys can have agents. So we have a lot of those conversations for sure. And if a player reaches out to me, a lot of these guys get my number. If they do that, if they reach out and they have questions about, where they stand in the draft process and what teams think of them, I'm happy to answer those questions. But I got too many friends on the coaching side that are trying to win football games and feed their families, that they don't need some all-star game idiot like me hitting them up about playing in the Senior Bowl. So there's plenty of time to get that done after the season.
And those first invites come out in what, like December, like late December after the regular season?
We'll do the first round in November. Again, okay. I think any earlier than that, and this is just feedback from college coaches, any earlier than that, they're like, Nagy, what are you doing, man? Like we're not even a month into the season or whatever. So I think that's the good timing. And then again, we always hold some roster spots back. We have to now for juniors. We can't even offer them until they officially declare. Right. So that's made the roster build a little different, right? That's a new dynamic. You gotta hold some spots for these juniors. And then it happens every year, especially with transfer portal now. These guys get better in November. Like you get a transfer that's at a new school, or you get a guy that has a new coaching staff coming in for a senior year. He might not know what he's doing the first 6 or 7 weeks out of the year. So he's not playing fast. He's thinking too much. And then you cut on the November tape and it starts to click and you're like, wow, this is the guy. This is who we thought he was going to be. And then when that happens, you better have a dang roster spot ready for him. So we don't invite to capacity in November, but that first round invites will go out around November.
We talked about juniors, talked about State of Alabama. I want to start to talk to you about some players. First off is Jalen Milroe, a guy who I absolutely love. I think he is sadly underrated. I mean, at this point a year ago, people were talking about Jaden Daniels being a 5th-round pick, moved up to be – it turned out to be the 2nd pick of the draft. I see that same sort of potential or ability in Jalen Milroe when you look at the physical skills. Just got to improve some of the things, in my opinion, is downfield passing. What do you think about Jalen Milroe?
Yeah, really excited to see Jalen. To me, he's one of those guys. I've been asked that a lot over the last few weeks. Like, who are you excited to see? Jalen's one of those guys. One, just what it's going to look like in Kalen DeBoer's offense. I think everyone assumes that they're just going to be a bombs away offense. But Kalen's a great coach. He was just playing to the strengths of what Washington had last year, right? I mean, Michael Penix was a great deep ball thrower. And they had, in my opinion, 3 eventual NFL starting receivers on that team with Adunze, McMillan, and Polk. So that's what they were offensively. I don't know if that's what they're going to be at Alabama this year. Maybe they will be because Milroe can throw a good deep ball. I think the biggest thing with Jalen is the anticipation. I think, right now he likes to see a clear picture before he lets it rip. I think that's where I'll be looking to see the improvement, and it should. Year 2 as a starter. I was at that Texas game last year that he got benched after, and it was really cool to see him. Got benched for South Florida, and then got reinserted, and then just got better and better and better over the course of the second half of the season. So yes, I agree, Tony. I mean, I just go back to when Lamar came out, and there was a lot of people bashing Lamar and the skill set, and I was with the Seahawks at that point, and trust me, there were people in our building that weren't Lamar fans, and it wasn't. Bill Polian takes all the brunt of the criticism because he's the one that said, Lamar should be a wide receiver. And again, it sounds crazy now in hindsight that Lamar is an MVP level player, but that he wasn't the only guy. I mean, there's people in the league thinking that too. And so the people right now, I've read a lot of harsh things about Jalen Milroe over the summer and his passing skill set. I'd just be careful because that's what people are saying about Lamar Jackson. So we'll see where it goes. But he's either the first or the second fastest player in that program in Tuscaloosa. That's saying a lot. I mean, it's not like he's playing at some small school in the middle of the country. I mean, he's at Bama and he's one of the top couple fastest dudes on the team. He's dynamic. He's got a chance to really ascend this fall.
Yeah, and I think especially, Jim, in a quarterback class that's not last year's class, right? We're heading into the year. We knew Caleb Williams was going to be really good. We were pretty sure Drake May was going to be really good. Now, you did have a bunch of other guys emerge, like Jaden Daniels, to Tony's point. I think this year, while you're looking at guys like Shedeur Sanders, Carson Beck, this to me is a much more wide open quarterback landscape here where I could probably pick any of 5 guys where if they end up being the top quarterback in next year's class, it wouldn't necessarily surprise any of us.
No, I'm with you. You throw Quinn Ewers in there. I mean, those are the Riley Leonard. What's he going to look like going from Duke to Notre Dame? I'm really excited to see that. Cam Ward going from Washington State to Miami. I'm excited to see that. So Will Howard in Columbus, Ohio. We liked Will last year. I was ready to invite Will Howard to the Senior Bowl last year. Most of the teams, when we did those calls, most teams had 4th, 5th round grades on Will Howard. So I think it's TBD. I think a lot is to be determined. I think a lot of these guys are gonna elevate, and I'm with you. It'll be interesting by the time we get to April what it looks like. But again, I don't think we're gonna have 6 guys in the top 12 like we did this past year.
No.
But I wouldn't be surprised if there's 3 or 4 guys in the first round. That wouldn't surprise me.
Tony, why don't you start rattling off all your players, man? Go ahead.
Well, I want to stand the quarterbacks because I mean, I've been to Senior Bowl practices where there were 4 quarterbacks on each team because of the depth of the position and what the teams wanted to see. I mean, besides the guys you mentioned, DJ Ugale of Florida State, Donovan Smith of Houston, you got KJ Jefferson at Central Florida. I mean, I know this is kind of asking you to forecast, but could we see a Senior Bowl roster with 4 quarterbacks on each side?
We could, that's certainly a possibility. I try to remain open-minded with all these positions, and again, the goal is just to bring the best players. So it's a couple years where it looked lean at tight end. We loaded. I try to get to like a total pass catchers number because a lot of these college tight ends you can put them out in the slot and basically, detach them and let them run routes and do all that stuff. So we went heavy at receiver. We'll bring 18 receivers and we'll only bring 6 tight ends. So we're just trying to bring the best players. So if there's 8 legit draftable quarterbacks that the league wants to see, we can go to 8. Then I worry a little bit about reps and how many reps guys are getting. So again, that's a little touchy. But those are conversations again you're just having with agents. And again, right now most of these quarterbacks have agents at this point. So, but it's certainly something we do.
Well, I want to ask you about some small school guys, especially on the offensive line, because the Senior Bowl has historically, put some terrific small school offensive linemen into the draft. It seems the flavor of the summer, and the guy that when I speak to scouts, they ask me, what do you think about him, or especially the agents? Charles Grant of William and Mary, the offensive tackle, who probably no one knows about unless you're in the scouting community. But this guy is really building a buzz around himself.
Yeah, because the athlete's really easy to like, Tony. You put on the tape, he's light on his feet. Some of the pass pro stuff looks really good. So, a year ago at this time, would you ask me who the highest drafted small school player would have been? I would have said Kieran Amagaji from Yale. And again, a guy that would have been here in the Senior Bowl had he not gotten hurt. We liked him a lot. I think we got Grant like a little bit lower on the board than where Kieran was, but did Kieran go he went day 2 to Chicago, I believe. I believe he went in the 3rd round.
Late 3rd round, right? Yeah,
I could see Grant. I don't see Grant getting out of the 4th. Could I see him getting into day 2? Certainly. And I saw him at Duke Manyweather's camp this summer, got a chance to meet him. And I told him, I said, you got to get stronger. You got to get stronger and you got to finish. You got to finish, dudes. Play with a little nastier edge to them. But what you can't teach is the athlete and the way he dances in pass pro. So, and again, everyone's looking for tackles. Those guys don't grow on trees. So I know that there's a huge get for William and Mary keeping him, and I know he probably had a lot of offers. So that's going to be cool. Teams will look at that. The fact that he had loyalty to his school is a good thing. But yeah, they're going to have a lot of foot traffic through William and Mary this fall.
Want to go? Big Sky's got a bunch of guys on your list, and it's usually Montana State. Jackie Slater out of Sacramento State that's had a pretty good program there. Elijah Ponder, the defensive end out of Cal Poly, and Lan Larison, the running back from Cal Davis, the same school that produced a guy by the name of Ken O'Brien 40 years ago. Just give us a little lowdown on those 3 guys.
Yeah, no. So I met Jackson Slater at that event as well. Looks the part. Looks like an NFL dude when he walks up on you. So that checks that box. He's not just a good small school offensive lineman on tape. He's got an NFL frame. Plays on his feet. Really makes it look easy. Again, a conversation I had with him was, you need to be more physically dominant. at that level. I mean, you got to put on the tape. You need to stand out more. But he's never on the ground. He's going to test well. He's got the body, so a lot to like there. Ponder, yes, I saw Cal Poly early in the summer, the Cal Davis running back, Marcus Weir, the tackle at Montana State. You brought up the Montana schools right off the bat. Weir's a guy we really like. He plays tackle there at Montana State, probably more of a guard just based off what we know the measurables are. I think he's 6'2" and change. But he was a guy that I had a couple Power 5 schools hit me up about in the spring. They were going to try to bring him in, and he's not a hard guy to like. There's not a lot of warm up. I mean, you put that kid on. I mean, he's got NFL talent. He's a draftable player. So yeah, it's good out there. I mean, there was a lot of West Coast talent last year. We had a lot of Oregon, a lot of Arizona last year, a lot of Washington. So there was some really high end talent out there on the West Coast. And this year, the small school West Coast guys there's some good ones.
Sure. One guy closer to home for you, a small school guy that didn't make the jump to 1A, DJ Jones, out of who now from Murray State, now playing at UAB, was really impressed with the athleticism and the movement skills he showed. Made the decision to go back to school for that extra year. Now at UAB, which is going to be they run the ball, but it's going to be a pro style type of offense. Talk about DJ Jones. I like this guy a lot. I like his upside.
Yeah, we like him too. And again, it's been a while since I watched the tape. We're going to be at their opener. I'm trying to think of, we're at their opener. We're there week 1. We're going to be at UAB a couple more times, get up there and see Coach Dilfer's team. So we're going to have plenty of looks at Jones, but he's a guy that we like. He's another guy we have a draftable grade on. So we're with you there, Tony. But it's important if we're going to have a draftable player out of this state, even though, the Troys, we had the 2 guys last year, Kamani Vidal and Javon Solomon. If they're in South Alabama, if you got draftable guys in the state, we want to keep them here, because their fan bases are going to travel. So we haven't had a UAB guy in the game in a couple of years. So hopefully DJ has the year we think he could have.
Tony mentioned a lot of guys up front. When you look for one more question on the watch list for me, Jim, is this a much bigger draft with bigger guys, specifically up front on defense, compared to what we saw last year?
Yeah, like last year's game was really offensive line heavy. That was a great class. We're seeing a lot of these guys are going to be rookie starters. And sometimes one-on-ones are really competitive. Trust me. You had Latu and a bunch of other great defensive linemen, but I would say overall the O-line won those one-on-one battles more so than the D-line. It's probably going to be flipped this year. If you looked at our board right now, it certainly looks uneven with the O-line, D-line. That's a really stacked defensive line class, all the way from like noses all the way out to the edge guys. If we're including the edge guys as defensive linemen, there's some depth there, and some of the big interior guys have pass rush, which is cool. Sometimes you're just dealing with, big 2-down bodies in there. But there's going to be some interior guys in this class that can get upfield. So it's the deepest D-line class we've had in at least a few years.
How many scouts do you have now sending out the games, Jim?
Got 11 former NFL guys, same number as last year. We mixed it up. A couple guys got opportunities back in the league. We brought a couple new guys in. Couple guys that had director titles last year in the league, which is cool. They had some guys that have some executive experience as well. And so, yeah, they're getting after it. It's a really good staff, getting to know some of those guys. Some of them I was really familiar with. A couple guys came back from last year's staff, and then a couple of them are new. A couple guys that I don't really know very well. So it's been fun. That's a fun part of the process. I say it all the time. I'm very, I like what we've built here on the football operations side, but a lot of it's selfish. If my job were to sit in Mobile and just like watch this tape and pick players by myself, that frankly wouldn't be a lot of fun. So selfishly, it's been great. It's great. I mean, we're all texting all the time and calling each other when we see a player we like, just like we would if we were working for a team. So, and then we've got a DFO upstairs, Jack Gilmore, and we got 3 scouting assistants. So all told, on the football side of the operation, there's 15 of us.
Nice. Final question for me. Just want to relate it back to the Giants here. Giants have 2 guys that were at the Senior Bowl last year in Theo Johnson and Drew Phillips that they have high hopes for this year. It looks like Drew Phillips is going to be the week 1 starting nickel. Give Giant fans a little bit of a feel for what you got out of being around those two guys for a week in Mobile last year.
Yeah, I think the cool part was watching the Hard Knocks and seeing Joe and Brandon Brown. Like, they said some really nice things about those guys and what it meant for them to be with them in Mobile. I know Brandon made the point that their secret sauce was like multiple touch points. And I've tried to tell agents that, and I try to tell the players is like, guys, all they're trying to do is get to know you. Like, you've got a week to spend around these teams. They're just, and again, when you go to Indy, if you're here for a week and then you go to Indy, you're going to see a lot of familiar faces. It's going to make your process a lot easier. So that was awesome. I hit up Joe after that first Hard Knocks episode, thanking him. Really appreciative of that, because they said they felt like they really got to know both guys. And again, we had some of the Giants coaches, that coach Theo down here on the offensive side of the ball. So it does not surprise me that here we are, start of the NFL season, and Drew Phillips is a starting nickel. He is feisty, competitive. He's got ball skills. And I think he can play outside, because I think he can really run. We had a lot of fast dudes in the Senior Bowl last year, and he didn't get beat vertical all week. So that does not surprise me. He was one of my favorite guys in last year's class. And then Theo, I think, for a guy like they made the point in the Hard Knocks. I mean, where do you find guys that are legit 6'5", 260, are running the way Theo runs? So again, no knock on the Penn State staff. They had a lot of weapons. You got to spread the ball around, but I think Theo is probably a little underused. He did have 7 touchdowns last year, so they did a great job of getting the ball in the red zone. But I think there's a lot to him. When I did Theo last year, I thought he would start off as he'd either be a really good number 2, and if things really hit, he could be a starter. So to get that guy in the 4th round, to me, that's a great pick. So hopefully with Bellinger, another Senior Bowl guy, that he'll find a way to be a factor for you guys this year.
Tony, anything else before we say goodbye?
That's it. Nothing else from me.
Jim, that was awesome, man. We really appreciate the time. Thanks so much for joining us as always. Anything else you want to tell the folks about your game? Anything you guys are doing? I know you're trying to make this a 365-day a year All-Star game. Tell the folks whatever you want them to know.
Yeah, I mean, if they don't follow the draft real closely, I will tell them the draft process becomes a lot more fun when you do pay attention to these guys during the college season. When you follow them from beginning to end and see the process and where they go, like if you were a Florida State fan last year and wired in a Braden Fisk, and to see what his rise was to, went 39th overall to the Rams, it's fun. So we'd love for everyone to follow us. Every Saturday during the college football season, we'll be posting videos of these guys from pregame up close. We're trying to take the fans down on the field with us, to show body type, to show movement, athleticism, all those fun things. So hopefully they'll follow along this fall, seniorbowl.com. And then I've got my own Twitter handle as well. So appreciate you guys having me on. This is always a ton of fun, guys. And I hope the Giants have a great year. We're pulling for those guys. Joe and Dave's are good friends, and I hope they have a great year.
Jim, always love talking to you every year. We thank you for joining us on Draft Season, presented by Moody's. Moody's is a proud partner of the New York Giants. Decode risk, unlock opportunity. Learn more at moodys.com. For Tony Pauline, I'm John Schmeelk. We'll see you next time on Draft Season.